There is a species of bird found across the mountain forests of western North America that demonstrates one of the most precise memory systems in the animal kingdom. The Clark's nutcracker can cache up to 30,000 seeds across hundreds of individual locations spread across miles of terrain and retrieve them months later with extraordinary accuracy. But researchers who have studied this bird across decades have noted something quietly revealing in its behavior. When resources grow uncertain, when the environment shifts in ways the bird cannot fully read, it stops ranging outward. It returns instead to the caches it knows, the nearby ones, the familiar ones. Even when those caches are smaller, even when the richer stores it buried further away are still there, waiting. The bird does not forget the distant caches. It simply stops trusting them enough to go. And so it circles the familiar ground, retrieving less than it stored, living beneath the ceiling of what it actually built. Marcus knew exactly how much was in his savings account. He knew the balance of his checking account, the minimum payments on both credit cards, and the rough trajectory of his 401k. He was 34 years old, a project manager in Columbus, Ohio, and by every external measure he was doing fine. He was not in crisis. He was not reckless. He was, by his own honest assessment, simply not moving. And on a Wednesday afternoon in October, sitting at his desk with a performance review open on his laptop and an $800 bonus notification glowing in his inbox, he made a decision that he would not fully understand for another 2 years. How does a person who knows better keep doing the same thing? And why is the answer almost never what they think it is? Before we go further, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And if you are new here, hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. There is a question that behavioral economists have been circling for decades, and it is not the question most people expect. It is not why people spend too much or save too little. Those are surface observations, the equivalent of noting that the Clark's nutcracker keeps returning to the nearby cache without ever asking why. The deeper question is this. Why do people who genuinely understand their financial situation, who have the information, the intention, and in many cases the available resources, still find themselves running the same financial patterns year after year, as though the understanding changes nothing at all? Why does knowing what you should do so rarely translate into doing it? Not once, not occasionally, but consistently, across years, across income levels, across every new attempt at a fresh start. And beneath that question sits a quieter one that most financial content never reaches. Is the gap between financial knowledge and financial action actually a discipline problem? Or is it something older, something written into the architecture of the brain itself, something that no budgeting app or savings challenge was ever designed to address? The Clark's nutcracker is not failing to retrieve its distant caches because it forgot where they are. It is failing because something in its behavioral wiring is telling it that the nearby ground feels safer right now. Understanding Marcus requires understanding that same wiring and the specific financial habitat that shaped it before he was old enough to question any of it. Columbus, Ohio sits in the middle of the American economic landscape in more ways than its geography suggests. It is a city of working families and steady incomes, of neighborhoods where financial stability means the bills are paid and the savings account exists even if it does not grow, where money is discussed in terms of what things cost rather than what things build. The east side of Columbus, where Marcus grew up, carries the particular quality of a place that has always been held together by effort rather than abundance. Functional, unpretentious, honest about its limitations in a way that shapes the people it produces at a level far below conscious awareness. This was Marcus's ecosystem, not a failing one, not a broken one. Simply one where the behavioral code around money had been written by necessity and reinforced by daily repetition across 2 decades before Marcus ever had the opportunity to examine whether that code still served him. His father worked long shifts at a distribution warehouse and came home tired in the particular way that physical work produces, not defeated, just spent, the kind of tired that makes the couch and the television feel like genuine restoration. His mother managed the household finances with the precision of someone for whom a single miscalculation had consequences that lasted months. Money in that house was not a subject of aspiration or long-term vision. It was a subject of management and protection. You tracked what you had. You protected it carefully. You did not lose what you had built through carelessness because what you had was the product of effort you could not easily repeat. These were not lessons Marcus was taught directly. They were patterns he absorbed through thousands of ordinary moments across the years of growing up inside that specific financial ecosystem. The way a young animal learns territorial behavior not through instruction, but through the continuous observation of how the world around it operates. By the time Marcus was 34, he had translated those absorbed patterns into a financial life that looked, from the outside, entirely reasonable. He earned $62,000 a year. He had a small emergency fund, contributed enough to his 401k to capture the company match, and paid his bills without missing payments. He had read about index funds and understood the mathematics of compound interest, the automated farm concept, the idea that money properly deployed generates returns that generate their own returns, building in the background across decades while you focus on everything else. He understood it completely, and yet his financial life had not moved meaningfully in 3 years. He was not building. He was maintaining. He was, in the most precise behavioral sense, running his financial life in survival mode, gathering only from the nearby caches, protecting existing inventory above all else, never ranging far enough from the familiar ground to reach the richer territory he had already identified and already knew was there. The bonus arrived on a Wednesday. $800 deposited directly, the confirmation sitting in his inbox like a quiet invitation to finally do the thing he had been telling himself he would do for the better part of a year. Marcus had been thinking about opening a brokerage account with a seriousness that felt different from casual intention. He had researched specific index funds. He had compared expense ratios. He had run the numbers on what a consistent monthly contribution would produce across 10 years, across 20, across 30, and the numbers were not abstract to him. He understood what they meant. The automated farm was not a metaphor he needed explained. It was a concept he had internalized well enough to explain to someone else. He knew where the distant caches were. He had mapped them with considerable care. And on that Wednesday afternoon, with $800 sitting in his account and the deposit screen one tap away, he was closer to beginning than he had been at any point in the preceding 12 months. He opened the brokerage app. He navigated to the deposit screen. He looked at the amount field. And then his colleague Jordan sent a message in the group chat about dinner on Saturday, a new restaurant downtown that the whole team had been talking about for weeks, and Marcus set his phone face down on his desk and thought, I should probably research this a little more before I commit. There is no urgency here. I want to make sure I am selecting the right fund before I put money in. I will do it properly next week when I have more time to think it through. Watch this moment carefully. Not because it represents a failure of character, but because of what it actually is beneath the surface of how it felt. The Nile crocodile is one of the most patient and efficient predators on the African continent. It can hold itself motionless at the water's surface for hours, conserving energy with extraordinary economy, waiting for precisely the right conditions before committing to action. Researchers studying its hunting behavior across the Nile Delta have documented a pattern that appears consistently across different individuals and different environments. When a larger opportunity moves through the water further downstream, a more substantial prey animal, a greater potential return on the energy investment of the hunt, the crocodile locked on the immediate surface rarely shifts its attention to follow it. The near horizon holds. The larger opportunity moves past. And the crocodile is not making an error. It is being exactly what hundreds of millions of years of evolutionary pressure designed it to be, an organism that evaluates reward in terms of proximity and immediate certainty rather than future value and abstract potential. Behavioral economists call this present bias. In the wild, it is near-horizon fixation, the perceptual architecture of an organism so calibrated to the immediate environment that the greater opportunity moving through the wider territory simply does not register with the same neurological weight as the resource directly in front of it. In Minecraft, it is surface farming, gathering only what is immediately visible and accessible at ground level, while the diamond-level wealth sits unmined in the deep terrain below, not forgotten, not unavailable, simply not where the behavioral system is currently directing its attention. Marcus did not decide not to invest his bonus. He decided to wait, and that distinction felt entirely real from the inside, because the brain does not experience its own justification process as justification. It experiences it as reasoning. The actual decision, the one that determined the outcome, had already been made before conscious thought was consulted. The emotional calculation ran faster than language. The abstract future value of an index fund deposit measured against the concrete immediate warmth of a Saturday evening downtown with people Marcus genuinely liked, and the nervous system returned its verdict in milliseconds. Everything that came after, the research rationale, the no-urgency framing, the next week intention, was the strategic reframe, the behavioral justification display. The construction of a logical explanation for a conclusion that the nervous system had already reached through a process Marcus had no conscious access to, and therefore no opportunity to examine. This is the respawn loop completing one of its cycles. Stage 1. The trigger, the bonus notification, the deposit screen, the genuine proximity to beginning. Stage 2. The emotional calculation, running faster than conscious awareness, drawing on 18 years of accumulated financial habitat data to assess the available options by their neurological weight rather than their objective value. Stage 3. The justified decision, more research needed, no urgency, next week when conditions are more favorable. Stage 4. The action and the brief relief, the phone face down, the group chat answered, the comfortable diffusion of a decision successfully deferred without the discomfort of acknowledging the deferral directly. Stage 5. The quiet reset. The relief fading. The deposit screen still there, unchanged, waiting patiently for the version of Marcus who would get to it properly next week. Saturday dinner cost $160. It was a genuinely good evening. And Marcus, sitting on his couch on Sunday afternoon with his coffee and his phone, fully and sincerely intended to open the brokerage account before the end of the month. Here is what most financial content does at this point in the story. It identifies the behavior, present bias, deferred investment, social spending, and it prescribes the correction. Automate the contribution so the decision is removed from the equation. Create accountability systems. Strengthen the commitment device. These are surface observations with surface interventions attached to them. The equivalent of telling the Clark's Nutcracker to range further without examining why the behavioral system that governs its ranging has contracted in the first place. They address the visible behavior without going anywhere near the psychological bedrock where the behavior was actually formed. This is where WealthWild goes to diamond level. The human brain contains a region called the nucleus accumbens, deeply embedded in the reward circuitry and among the most consequential structures in the brain for understanding financial behavior. When you anticipate or experience something your brain has learned to associate with reward, this region releases dopamine, not as a simple signal of pleasure, but as a prediction and reinforcement signal, a neurological marker that encodes the message. This pathway matters. Remember it, prioritize it, return to it. The Saturday dinner with Jordan and the group was not merely a pleasant social occasion. It was a dopamine event, warm, socially bonding, sensorially immediate, and already deeply associated in Marcus's behavioral memory with dozens of similar evenings that had produced the same neurological signature across years of consistent reinforcement. The brokerage deposit was not a dopamine event. It was an abstract future value proposition with no sensory immediacy, no social warmth, no practical way of delivering to the nucleus accumbens the kind of signal it was actually weighing in its evaluation. The magpie does not collect shiny objects because it lacks the cognitive capacity for better judgment. It collects them because the shiny object delivers an immediate, sensory, neurologically certain reward response in a way that the abstract future value of leaving it behind simply cannot match at the level of the brain systems making the actual decision. Marcus's nervous system was not malfunctioning. It was performing exactly the function that 300,000 years of evolutionary selection pressure designed it to perform, evaluating available options by their neurological proximity and sensory certainty rather than by their 30-year financial return profile. But the neurological architecture is only the first layer of the diamond level. Below it sits the evolutionary mismatch, and this is the insight that changes the entire frame of the conversation. The human brain was shaped across environments where the most consequential resource decisions had time horizons measured in hours and days, not decades. Where social belonging was not a lifestyle preference, but a genuine biological survival variable. Where exclusion from the group carried consequences that were visceral and immediate in ways that the modern social exclusion of missing a dinner simply echoes at a neurological level without replicating at a practical one. Where the resource directly in front of you was real and graspable, and certain in a way that the resource you might accumulate across 30 years of consistent index fund contributions was so abstract that the brain had no reliable architecture for weighing it against the concrete present. That brain, ancient, efficient, exquisitely calibrated to the environment that produced it, is now navigating a financial system that rewards precisely the kind of long-horizon, abstract, deferred gratification thinking that it was never designed to prioritize. The near-horizon fixation that made the crocodile one of the most successful predators in its ecosystem is, in a modern financial life, a compounding liability. Not a flaw, not a failure. A mismatch between an instrument of extraordinary precision and an environment it was not built for. And beneath even this sits the layer that most behavioral finance content never reaches, the habitat reinforcement loop. Marcus's financial ecosystem did not end at the boundary of his childhood home. It continued into adulthood in new forms that produced the same behavioral outputs through different mechanisms. The social group he inhabited as an adult carried its own spending norms, its own implicit financial culture, its own server conformity, the collective behavioral standard that individual members adopt not through deliberate choice, but through the same absorption process that Marcus had used to internalize his parents' financial code across the years of growing up inside their ecosystem. The media environment he consumed was architected at an engineering level to exploit present bias, to make the immediate, the visual, and the sensorially rich feel more real and more urgent than the abstract and the distant. The inherited money beliefs from his childhood, spending as earned reward, investment as something for people with more financial room, financial stress as the normal ambient condition of adult life, were not old software running on a new machine. The machine was still inside an environment that continuously reconstructed the conditions necessary to keep that software running. The habitat was still producing the behavior because the habitat had never fundamentally changed. Understanding this is not the same as changing it, but it is the only starting point from which genuine change becomes possible, because you cannot interrupt a pattern you have not yet learned to see from outside. What is one financial belief you hold today that you absorbed from your earliest financial ecosystem? And have you ever examined whether it still accurately describes the environment you are actually living inside? There is a pattern running beneath the specific story of Marcus and the Wednesday bonus and the Saturday dinner that appears with enough consistency across different people, different income levels, and different financial situations that it deserves a name precise enough to be useful. Wolfwild calls it the proximity loop, the hunt-feed-rest cycle, the respawn loop, and mapping its 4 stages is the difference between experiencing each financial cycle as a fresh individual decision and finally being able to observe the full shape of the architecture you have been living inside. Stage 1 is the resource moment, the threshold pause, the spawn point paralysis. A financial opportunity arrives and creates a genuine opening, a bonus, a period of lower expenses, a moment when the inventory has space and the distant cash is briefly visible from where you are standing. This is the stage where the loop either continues or breaks, and it is the stage that feels most like a choice while actually being the most heavily determined by everything that comes before it. Stage 2 is the proximity calculation, the near-horizon fixation, the surface farming. Before conscious deliberation begins, the brain runs its evaluation of available options through the lens of neurological proximity. How immediate, how sensory, how socially connected, how consistent with the existing behavioral code of the habitat. The abstract future value of the distant cache is discounted against the concrete present value of the nearby one by a process so fast and so automatic that it is complete before the part of the brain responsible for long-term planning has been consulted. Stage 3 is the behavioral justification display, the strategic reframe. The conclusion that was reached in Stage 2 is translated into a deliberate decision through the construction of a plausible rationale. More research needed. Not quite the right moment. Next month when the conditions are more favorable. The brain experiences this process as reasoning and decision-making. It is more accurately the process of explanation-making, generating a coherent narrative for a conclusion that the nervous system determined before language was involved. Stage 4 is the reset and reinforce, the quiet return to the baseline state, with the loop having tightened almost imperceptibly through each completed cycle. The relief of the deferred decision fades. The financial situation remains essentially unchanged. The next resource moment will arrive, and when it does, the proximity loop will be ready, familiar, well-worn, running as smoothly as a trail that has been traveled 10,000 times. The loop does not break through effort or intention. It breaks through the specific kind of awareness that allows you to name all 4 stages while they are happening, to observe the hunt-feed-rest cycle from outside rather than from inside, to recognize the respawn loop before you have already completed it again. The Clark's Nutcracker eventually ranges outward again. Not always because the nearby caches have been exhausted, though sometimes that is what finally shifts the behavioral radius. Sometimes it is something quieter, a change in the quality of the light across the familiar terrain, a shift in the environmental conditions subtle enough that the bird barely registers it consciously, just enough to make the familiar ground look different for a moment. Different enough that the worn path of the patrol suddenly reads as a path rather than simply as the world. And in that brief perceptual shift, the distant caches, the ones stored with extraordinary precision across hundreds of locations, the ones that have been waiting untouched through an entire season, become accessible again. Not because the bird changed fundamentally, because it adjusted the radius of its attention by the smallest available increment. And that adjustment was enough. Marcus eventually opened the brokerage account. It did not happen on a dramatic afternoon in the wake of a crisis or a revelation. It happened on a Tuesday evening in February, 3 months after the October bonus, when he noticed, not through any deliberate self-examination, but almost accidentally, The way you sometimes notice a sound that has been present for a long time only when it briefly stops. That he had completed the same internal conversation about beginning to invest more than 40 times across 18 months and arrived at the same outcome on every single occasion. Not because he lacked discipline, not because he did not genuinely want to do it, but because the proximity loop had been running so smoothly and so completely beneath the surface of his conscious awareness that he had experienced each cycle as a fresh individual decision rather than as the latest iteration of a pattern that had been repeating since long before he first opened the brokerage app. The moment he could see the loop from outside, the resource moment, the proximity calculation, the behavioral justification display, the reset and reinforce, was the moment it became something he was observing rather than something he was simply inside. That shift did not feel dramatic. It felt like a Tuesday evening, and it was enough. The question this story was always really asking is not what Marcus should have done differently. The question is this: how many times has the proximity loop completed itself in your own financial life while you experienced each cycle as a unique and reasonable individual decision? And what might become possible, not through discipline or effort or better information, but simply through the kind of elevated perspective that allows the full shape of a pattern to finally become visible. If you could observe your own financial behavioral architecture from far enough above the daily terrain to see it clearly for the first time, what you recognized in yourself while watching this story is the conscious pause, the apex elevation, the moment of switching from survival mode towards something that looks, for the first time, like the beginning of building mode. The proximity loop, the near-horizon fixation, the surface farming, is one pattern among many that the WealthWild community investigates together in this space. If you recognize something true about your own financial habitat in what we explored today, share it in the comments. Not the version you would tell a financial advisor, the honest one. That is what this community is built on. And if you are new here, the subscribe button is not an invitation to consume content. It is an invitation to join a behavioral investigation. We will see you in the next one.